Hello everyone, this is Ben Eno, welcoming you to the 707th edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on ON 1240 Radio as we broadcast live from the 2017 Exeter UFO Festival here in Exeter, New Hampshire, and the historic Exeter Town Hall.
Many thanks to the Exeter Area Kiwanis Club, sponsors of the great annual event that we have here, which benefits local children's charities. The UFO Festival continues today here in downtown Exeter, so if you're within reach, please come by and meet the speakers you're about to hear and help support this great event. Okay, our panelists today include legendary UFO researchers, speakers, and authors Richard Dolan, Kathleen Martin, Peter Robbins, Travis Walton, Denise Stoner, Stephen Mather-Lees, Carolyn LaRocque, and the great folks from Seacoast Saucers of New England, Chuck Credo. Hey, didn't Chuck do a great job last night at the Meet the Speakers event? Mike Stevens, Valerie LaFazzo-Roy, and Andrew Kitt. Did I miss anyone? Good. Okay. So let's begin our questions. All right. Okay. So because we only have 1 hour, we won't be able to do phone calls today, but many listeners have sent questions, and we will, of course, take audience questions beginning right now. And here's our first contributor.
Good afternoon. There's 11 people on the panel, and I appreciate you all putting your time and effort into this great mystery, wherever it leads. I'd like to know, this is just an opinion, anybody have an opinion something is near happening that is going to be a world-changing event? Does anyone have, this is more of an emotional, intuitive question, but if any of you out of the 11 have a sense of that, I'd like you to share it with us, that there's some kind of event in the near future that may affect us all here on Earth, okay? Thank you.
Okay, we'll begin with Travis Walt.
Well, I'm certainly hearing a lot of talk, chatter out there about people thinking that something's imminent. And, you know, in discussions last night with the Meet the Speakers thing, it kind of touched on that sort of thing is what could break this wide open? What could, you know, make for the big paradigm shift? You know, the thing that really gets a message out there. And I mentioned the term going viral, you know, that there's an event that could happen at any moment, you know, that something that could just catch on with the public and catch hold in ways that you can't predict or explain.
Okay, thank you, Travis. Anyone else on the panel? Stephen Mather-Lees.
Unfortunately, we've been hearing that something is about to happen for quite a long time now. And it's frustrating. It keeps, well, next year or maybe the year after, but it's happening. And of course, 2012 was when it was all going to happen, right? And that's, what, 5.5 years ago now. So I really think it's up to us. Spread the word around, and get involved. It's not, nobody's going to do it for us. I think we would all like that to happen, but it's up to us.
Okay. Andrew Kitt.
It's nice to think about paradigm shifts as if they're going to happen all at once. Probably what's going to happen is as viewpoints change, it'll happen progressively, and you'll look back and realize that the paradigm has shifted. But to expect something to just suddenly inundate the environment and all of a sudden everybody's thinking differently is kind of unrealistic. In all likelihood, it's going to be a perspective looking back that'll make us realize that it happened than something suddenly happening.
Very quickly, this is Richard Dolan. Not a fan of people who make predictions. I think there are people out in our field who make predictions all the time, and almost every one of them are always wrong. So when you hear predictions based on intuition or inside sources that are undisclosed, I would say stop your ears and walk away is your best bet, seriously. Having said that, you can look at some trends, very easy to see, just politically, if nothing else. In the United States, we're seeing a fracturing of the social fabric. or tearing of the social fabric between left and right. Social networks are amplifying this, and this is really increasingly becoming more and more dangerous. And it only will take one economic crash to really create some big problems. That's my personal fear. And if you really want an intuitive response, that would probably be mine. But I don't know when that would ever possibly happen. Hopefully not.
Any other speakers wish to contribute to that question? Okay, well, let's go to a listener question. Ben, why don't you take that one? And well, that would be nice. Yeah, we are.
So this question comes from Jennifer in Richmond, Kentucky, and it's directed to anyone on the panel, really. So is there any real evidence that aliens have underground bases on Earth and that they are working with the government? Also, what if they are working with more than one government that has different interests? All right, going over to Peter Robbins.
Several decades ago, when I first heard the term secret underground base associated with the subject of UFOs, I almost laughed in its face. It seemed so science fiction-y, so silly, so hyper, conspiratorial and silly. Well, that was before I began to study the history of militaries in the 20th century, became involved in research on Britain's best-known case, and learned and had it confirmed repeatedly that classified underground facilities exist all over the world, in some cases to a degree that boggles the imagination, not just for military or government security for housing key people in time of cataclysm or national chaos, but also for multinational corporations, scientific installations, laboratories working with secured or dangerous materials. There's a book that Richard Dolan publishes by Dr. David Sauter, Secret Underground Bases, and a follow-up book to that. Dr. Sauter's work is very enlightening. We also have to remember that there are huge, huge natural caverns. Anybody that's ever visited Carlsbad Cavern or cave complexes up here in New Hampshire or the area in New England knows some of these spaces are mind-boggling in terms of how large they are. As to the legend, the mythology, part of the oral tradition of the history of UFOs and other intelligences, yes, as long as there's been interest in the subject, there's been speculation around them having installations below us, underneath the bases, underneath the earth, and at the same time working with human entities, government, military, etc. For me, personally, the short answer is I don't know. I guess nothing is out of the question. I know that I find myself objecting when people will come up to me and seriously begin to talk about the Eisenhower Treaty with the aliens of 1954, and my thought is to grab them by the shoulders and shake them and say, get a life. As Bud Hopkins used to say, the aliens don't have to sign treaties with anybody. They can do what they want. I don't know, but it's not out of the question. But underground bases and installations in the service of secrecy, military development, scientific development, housing people considered important to the running of the world, absolute reality, no question about it.
Anyone else on the panel want to tackle the question? No? Well, back to Paul.
Okay, thank you, Ben. As I say, if anyone wants to ask a question from the audience, please just walk up to the mic. And we have a young lady just about to do so. Please state your question.
This is a question for the whole panel. Does anybody have any insights into whether the slew of celebrity deaths in 2016 have any connection to disclosure or ET involvement?
Anyone in the panel? No one? See, they're all involved with the CIA. You want to try it? Okay. Richard Dolan.
That's an interesting question, and I don't have an answer to that. But I would just encourage anyone who wants to study the depths of how far Hollywood goes into the secret world. There are no shortage of Hollywood insiders, YouTube people going on YouTube, of every segment of the entertainment industry who have talked in detail about the intense level of control that exists over Hollywood celebrities. In particular, the music industry seems to be the worst. Agenda driven, and you hear like Illuminati, mind control, Project Monarch, it's all out there. There's a lot of interesting stuff to go to. I would just encourage people to check out the website Vigilant Citizen. Some people may know it. It's, I think, one of the most in-depth, smart analyses of Hollywood that's out there. But as far as the deaths, I couldn't say.
Anyone else on the panel? No one else. Okay. Go ahead, sir.
So back to Mr. Robbins on treaties. So you have people that can come and go as they please. What do we have to offer? Is anybody in the panel? I have a suggestion afterwards. What would we have to offer them in exchange for a treaty? It's got to be a two-way deal. What do we have that they want or need or could use? Anybody have an idea? I got one afterwards.
Okay, we'll start with Peter Robbins.
If they, these other intelligence, I've never been terribly comfortable with the word aliens, are as technologically advanced as they seem to be, 10,000, 10 million years, choose your number. If they have this history of coming and going with impunity, if they can literally take whatever they want, including human beings, that's a challenging question. I don't know. There might be some intellectual, can we meet with you and discuss or exchange ideas? But as is the case in world history, the strong take what they want, the weak are subjugated, and history is written by the winners. So I can't think of an entity that, they'd need to negotiate with us about offhand. I may be off.
We're going to do...
Can I give my answer, what I think they're going to give?
Okay, well, we're going to give it to Richard Dolan.
I don't want to keep talking, but there's a couple of reasons why there would be. First of all, they might be interested in our genetics. We're very interesting genetically. There's a lot of biological interests on planet Earth. In terms of, what could we possibly do to stop them, I would actually have a perspective on it. I mean, we probably couldn't take them in a street fight, but we could be annoying. There's a lot of us on the planet. We do have weapons. It might not be in their interest to have us get all worked up over them being here publicly. So there could be a lot of reasons that they would want us to keep things on the DL. So they would actually want to work things out with us, at least in theory. There would be a reason for them to kind of work things out with the ruling elites of the planet. This only speculate. No one knows. All right, no one really knows. The whole idea of a treaty, people speculate. There's not proof of any of this. The only thing that there's proof of is that there's an actual UFO phenomenon for real. There's proof that our militaries can't deal with these objects. There's proof that it exhibits great levels of concern that doesn't seem to be under our control. That you can take that to the bank. Beyond that, you've got rumors, leaks, and frankly, we just don't know.
Thank you, Richard. Anyone else on the panel care to answer the question? Stephen Mather-Lees.
Yeah, I think there's enough ETs visiting us that at least some of them, hopefully most of them, are in fact responsible and would be prepared to ask permission to interact with us in various ways. There's probably some bad guys, or almost certainly some bad guys that are just going to take what they want. What I can't believe is that anybody would travel 100 light years to cut up cows, or cats, or pigs, or, that doesn't make sense. I'm an engineer and stuff has to make sense, otherwise I won't buy it.
Thank you, Stephen. Anyone else on the panel care to tackle the question?
So I pretty much, Mr. Dolan's statement, I think that the ET, the elites have agreed, give us some technology and we'll control the herd. We'll be the security guards and run the media and keep everything on the down low. So I think that's
okay, thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Next questioner, please.
My name is Alex. I'm from Rochester, New Hampshire, and thank you all for being present here. Try to keep this very brief. I watched a Frontline documentary on public television in September of 2016. That's when the original program aired, September. I think it might have been September 27th. I'm not sure. It's a Frontline documentary about the Obama administration, and it had a video footage of President Obama at the White House Correspondents' Dinner in 2011, addressing a very large audience. And President Obama was standing on the stage, and he was making fun of Donald Trump, who at that time had not yet officially declared his candidacy for president. And he was roasting Donald Trump publicly, with Donald Trump in the audience, making fun of Donald Trump for having made a big deal over the birther issue. And one of the things he used to ridicule Donald Trump was Roswell. And I'm not aware if anybody in the UFO community is aware of this incident where at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, it was, I believe it was April 2011, if I'm not mistaken, Obama made a number of jokes. And one of the jokes he said on stage was, "What really happened in Roswell?" And after asking that question publicly, the whole audience laughed. And this was in the context of other jokes that he was putting forth to make fun of and belittle and demean Donald Trump. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that. Thank you.
Okay, anyone care to tackle that? Charles Credo from Seacoast Sausage.
I think I know exactly the program that you're referring to. In fact, if I remember correctly, Seth Meyer, formerly of Saturday Night Live, was the writer for these press conferences that you're referring to. In fact, he wrote a lot of the jokes for these press conferences in the Obama administration. So when you reference that, you have to remember that they hire a professional comedian to go on and help write some of these skits and some of these jokes. And you're absolutely right. At that time, there were a lot of jokes made. And I think your question really comes down to, well, what do we think about that? Peter Robbins gave a very good presentation today about the history of how we have almost, in many ways, postmodernized the UFO through different media. And this is just another example of how when we ridicule or make jokes or find ways to lighten up what is to many people a very serious situation, it actually downplays the serious trauma that people go through. So personally, I feel as though we need to start taking this subject a lot more seriously, but we also need to realize that the issue that you're talking about, you had a professional Saturday Night Live skit writer helping the Obama administration write some of these things as well. So taken into context.
Anyone else in the panel want to tackle it? All right, next question.
Does anybody have any theories on maybe empathy? Do any of these aliens show it? Because everything I've always heard, like even from my dad, it doesn't seem like they're getting what we're feeling. They're getting what we're feeling. Empathy. Do aliens feel empathy?
Denise Stoner.
As an experiencer myself, they came across to me as serious scientists, and I had one that I called the doctor, and he did show some emotion. He was very curious as to how I was reacting, my emotions as to why he was doing what he was doing to me. They are very restrained in demonstrating any emotions themselves, but most humans that I've spoken to that experience similar to mine come back with a great degree of empathy, more so than they had. So it has an effect on humans that way. And I think that we need to have that. So we're coming back with more empathy. We're able to sympathize with other humans more so than we could before. And I think this is good. So whether or not they have it, it doesn't really matter to me. I was not harmed. They always return to me. I'm back every single time. I would not say stop it. So as scientists, that's what I believe they are. They're doing a project for a reason. I don't know what it is, but I'm glad that I have more empathy myself towards humans.
Do you think that's what they're looking for?
Excuse
or
me,
trying to figure out? Are they trying to figure out that why we have empathy and they don't?
I have wondered whether or not they're trying to fix it to a certain degree within themselves. I don't know for sure, but perhaps.
Kathleen Martin.
One of the questions that Free asked on its questionnaire
with 3,000 participants was have the ETs shown emotions, emotional expression toward you. And the majority, and I don't recall the statistic right now, I had it yesterday on my PowerPoint. It was, I believe, about 75%, stated that they did observe an emotional response from these extraterrestrials. With regard to being empathetic, I want to use the word empathic, where they can sense your feelings, they can feel your feelings. And many of the individuals who have completed MUFON's experiencer survey, which is ongoing. We have 500 respondents. We've closed the first part of the survey. It's a 3-part study that we're doing. And the majority stated that they felt that the ETs were empathic. And as Denise stated, also the majority of experiencers who completed the survey stated that they believed they had become more empathic. So when I ask people why they think that has occurred, many state that they feel that the ETs are very concerned about human behavior. And if we all become empathic, then we will be different. We'll live in a different kind of society. We won't hurt others because we will feel that pain ourselves. So that is what I've been able to gather from the surveys and from speaking with experiencers.
Andy Kidd would like to tackle this as well.
I just want to add that science works best when it is objective, and empathy tends to lead to bias. So if they're here to study us, then you can guarantee they would minimize their empathic relations with us. So it might just be an issue of need. And if they don't appear to be empathic, that's because it's not objective to do so.
Anyone else like to tackle the question? No, all set. Please step up to the mic.
I suppose my question is more like broad in that, like, the Book of Enoch, like the Vedas from Hinduism and things. There's been like a long history of people being interested in aliens and it showing up over and over again. And like after the fact of you, like your experiences, what you've understood, what you've picked up on, do you think there's any validation to all of those things, which I assume most of you would have some type of like strong opinion on, is that like these occurrences through history have been like early states of like just man like having that interaction and validating it? And if you have any opinion through history, you know, in terms of like spiritually, I guess, like I'm not super spiritual myself, but I like to read, so for me to see that and stuff, it's somewhat of a validation that something's occurred prior to us, long before us. It's always been here. It's been well before us. And I suppose that's my question, I guess. Anybody has an opinion on it, or
anyone on the panel? All right, well, give it over to my wonderful co-host, Paul Eno.
Oh, thank you, Ben. No, just as one who has a seminary education, that has come up many times in our own books, etc. There seems to be a trend through ancient documents, especially if you read them in the original languages, where our remote ancestors encountered something they believe to be supernatural beings. There are a lot of oddities in the record. For example, and this goes back to the most ancient cultures we know, the Andaman and Nicobar Islanders of the Indian Ocean, the San and Khoisan Bushmen of Africa, whose DNA goes back something like 150,000 years, and whose tradition isn't much younger than that. And they will tell you that originally there was essentially one god with like a male, a female, and a child who was usually the human race. There are all kinds of folklore implications to that. But there is a pattern of more recent events that are reflected in documents such as Genesis, if you read it in Hebrew. Also, the Atrahasis of the Akkadians, with ancient civilization most people never heard of, or the Karsag epics of the Sumerians. The whole narrative is that you had some sort of agricultural colony founded by someone. If you want to be really conservative, you could say maybe the Indo-Europeans, but because they weren't flying around as did Enoch, at least, in strange craft looking down upon probably the Rift Valley, which was volcanic at the time, with the Anunnaki and all this business we don't have time to talk about. But it can't all be coincidence. Something happened, and it was couched in the terms of folklore and myth. And what are folklore and myth? They're the vessels of the memory of the human race. So definitely, yes, we can't really pin it down, but we're rediscovering things that our remote ancestors really knew.
So I want to say one thing to that is that has that interaction that you've experienced affected you after the fact, like to look back at like ancient people and saying like, oh wow, I wasn't crazy, or there isn't strange things occurring. It's that there was some substance there, and it's verification, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Well, thank you. Right. Anyone care to respond to an experiencer's point of view? Travis, certainly a good one to respond to that question.
Well, unique to the Arizona, where I come from, is evidence of ancient contact with the native peoples. There are rock carvings, petroglyphs, in the canyon walls near where I live, depicting scenes of a flying disc, with a man with a bow aiming an arrow at it. And these things, can be authenticated because when the rocks are carved, it forms a patina over hundreds of years that takes a great deal of time to form. So I thought that was interesting. I also gave a talk in Gallup, New Mexico, to an audience of nearly 1,000 Native Americans, and I got a lot of feedback from them about things that occur out there on the reservation that they, in the past haven't been willing to talk to outsiders about, but they really opened up to me, because my experience, and because I was actually raised with 5 Native American foster brothers and sisters, so it was fascinating to hear these stories. Like this one guy had a grandmother who had woven a blanket. The Navajo blankets are very famous, depicting a scene of an encounter with the Sky people. So it goes way back before there were Europeans or any stories that we might have carried to them.
Anyone else want to give it a shot? Alrighty, Miss LaRock.
Just a quick statement. When I lived in Pennsylvania, we used to shop at a Native American-owned store called Coyote Trails, and I became pretty close friends with the owners, and we'd been talking about UFO subjects for a while, and they told me of a prophecy, and I can't remember from which tribe it was, but it was a tribe in Pennsylvania, and their prophecy was that when the clouds crisscross the sky like spider webs, the sky gods will return. And they've got a lot more to it than that, and I always found that fascinating, and that was before I was really into and noticing the chemtrails and all that. And I just thought, when I started noticing that they were like spider webs in the sky, I thought that was pretty interesting, and I just thought I'd share that.
That's pretty interesting. Anyone else want to tackle that before we get to the next question? No? Okay.
Hi, my name's Jenna. I'm from Exeter, and it's kind of hard for me to talk about, but I see orbs in the sky almost on a nightly basis, right here in Exeter, almost anywhere that I go, and they stop, they change direction, they move really fast, they move really slow, and sometimes when I point them out to people, sometimes others will see them, but for the most part, other people do not. And I just didn't know if maybe I'm just crazy and seeing things, or if that's actually real and possibly UFO related. But I just didn't know if there's a reason why some people can see these things and some can't, because I'm pretty sane for the most part, I would say. So.
Peter Robbins.
This is a question that fascinates me, and one I'd actually, rather than hearing myself give my part of the answer here, Kathy and or Denise speak about it. Over the years that I worked as the assistant to a man named Bud Hopkins, who pioneered a lot of the original research into the abduction phenomena, I had the privilege of literally being at his shoulder or like a fly on the wall, working with hundreds, not 100, but 500, 600, 700 people coming and going over those years. And at certain points, data points would build up in our research. And at certain moments, you'd see, my gosh, there's a preponderance of evidence here that X equals Y or whatever. And at one point, essentially an informal statistic revealed itself, which was there was no question in our mind that they, for lack of a more descriptive term, seemed to be able to selectively either appear to certain people, but not to others. Whether it was a crowd scene or two persons, one would perceive the phenomena, be it a being, a craft, something that we might call an orb or variation of, and the other person or the other people could not. Was this a function of something physiological or psychological about that person, or some special gift or lack of same? Was it something that they could turn on or off selectively? I remember one case in particular of a person being on a crowded beach on a beautiful summer day in Australia, a person with a history of abduction, and looking up, seeing a fully articulated disc-shaped craft, taking photos, trying to call other people's attention to it. No one saw it. No one seemed to respond to them. And the next thing they knew, they were on it and then returned. But that's as good as I can get.
Already passing. Oh, yeah. Well, there were many people who were asking, let's just go in a line. So Denise Stoner first.
I want to respond to that just a little bit, because when I speak this afternoon, I'm going to show a picture of an orb that I took. I saw it first. It also made a sound, and it followed us down a road. So that's going to be shown and described when I talk this afternoon.
All right, thank you, Denise. Valerie LaFauzo-Roll.
So my colleagues were urging me to speak up to you because so we work with the KRI Center just up the road here in Stratham, and our number one rule when we have an event is you cannot start a sentence with "this might sound weird, but." Right. Because we don't want people to come in and feel like they're going to be judged. And 9 times out of 10, people walk through our doors and they have these experiences and they feel strange and they feel out of place and they tell their story, and other people in the room say, hey, I had that story too. I've had that experience. So if you're looking to connect with people who see these things, I highly encourage you to get in touch with us, and you can find some common ground with other people. Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie. Okay, next questioner, please.
Hi, this is Michael from Belmont, Mass. I've been running a UFO meetup in Watertown, and one of the questions that came up recently relates to what we started our hour with just a bit ago, which is how can we think of innovative new platforms and innovative ideas, clever ideas to get the message out about disclosure, perhaps YouTube videos and the like. Reminds me of what we talked about last night a little bit. But does anyone have any new brainstorm-like ideas?
Anyone on the panel care to tackle that? Okay, Kathy Martin.
I've been saying this for a while, but I think that disclosure is going to come from the bottom up. And I think that everyone in this audience has learned some information over the weekend from people who are credible researchers. You've heard statistical information, you've probably observed evidence, and I think that the best thing for each of us to do is to tell our families, to tell our friends, and ask them to pass that evidence on, that information on to others. I don't think that it's ever going to come from the top down unless they're forced to do it. And I can't imagine that there would be a treaty agreed to by these non-human entities and all of the governments of this world. That's my opinion.
Thank you, Kathy. Okay, next questioner, please.
What's
Oh, I beg your pardon. I'm sorry, there's one more answer. Sorry about that, Richard.
I want to answer the previous question first because I wanted to jump in on that, relating to the orbs, and then I actually have something to say on the social. As far as the orbs, my own investigations, I've encountered now done a lot of interviews with people who have had very bizarre sightings of things that do seem to appear and not appear. They phase in, they phase out. I don't know how to explain this scientifically, but I do think that this is a real thing. In terms of the orbs, we always have to be very critical of our own perception. So we have to be, I'm not saying this is the case with you, but there are always possibilities of that we're misidentifying what we think we're seeing in the night sky, including our own vision, including optical effects and so forth. That's a real phenomenon. Having said that, you may be seeing real orbs. I've encountered a lot of orb stories that are totally credible, in my opinion. So I think that there is such a phenomenon, and you should talk to some of the local folks here who really can help you with that. Relating to the social media, there's two ways I look at it. This is the medium and the message, okay? So in terms of how we get the message across, we've got to be very clear, very factual, and we have to find a way that this resonates emotionally with people. Why do UFOs matter? It's really not hard to understand. They're important, they're denied, and they mean something very, very big. I think our messages when we talk about this should be to the point. No, I'm really not a big fan of chit-chat. I'm not a fan of dancing around, so we should have like quick, if you do YouTube, 5 minute, 10 minute, get in, get out. And we should be brave, factually based, and not be afraid to talk to our social of our network of friends. Our example of courage influences other people, and they in turn will influence others as well. And that's how it works, and we absolutely can do that by being innovative. YouTube, Facebook, social media, web pages, it's all there.
Andy Kit would like to tackle this as well.
And like Richard, addressing the previous speaker, the orb question is something that can be tested empirically. And in fact, the KRI Center, I welcome you to talk to me afterwards, and we can probably look at this and see exactly what you are experiencing. Regarding the social media, the big concern with social media is creating a pop culture phenomenon rather than a phenomena of concern. We have an issue here that affects everybody, and we need to be concerned about it, not just do a pop culture glorification of it. And that's something that you need to think about as you get the word out. Are we worried about this, or should we just be, wow, check out the new rock star alien thing?
Stephen Mather-Lees.
Hi, I wanted to say a little more also about the phenomenon of some people seeing things and some not, and I've experienced that both ways. I have seen things that other people around me didn't see, and they've seen things that I didn't see. And it's highly subjective, this thing, and I think it has a very large spiritual content. It's not all scientific, and that perhaps it's because it's a science that we haven't figured out yet. On some level it is, but for the time being it's subjective. And
Peter Robbins.
Following up extremely briefly on Kathleen's insightful thoughts of not being afraid to speak out to friends, office colleagues, family. Be emboldened by something that I've observed, I guess, over the last 10 years. And it involves folks primarily beginning in their 40s and certainly well through their 70s and older. This was not the case that I observed in traveling around the country, speaking to many people, conferences, lectures, radio shows, etc. 10 years ago, even half a dozen years ago, but now I see it all the time. Every year, more and more people care less and less what other people think about what they think about the subject that we're here to study.
Profound thoughts. Anyone else? No? Next question.
Hey, I want to go back in time to Kathy Martin with Barney and Betty Hill. Back in the 80s, there was a book by Shirley MacLaine that stimulated a lot of thought of channeling and UFOs too, and it became a movie. It was a TV show, you know, her book Out on a Limb, and then it became a made-for-TV movie, much like Barney and Betty Hill, Interrupted Journey, a book which stimulated me at age 10 or so to be interested in this. But in overall, like, the idea they were a biracial couple interested me too. But what do you have to say about how she changed her philosophy of life? Did she really see them as benevolent? There's some issues about, you know, the way she was treated and the way they took the book away from her and things. So I'd just like you to go back to way back to the 60s and tell us what Betty Hill really, and why did they ever revisit her? And did she have a longing for that revisitation? So just fill in a little bit of that ancient history from the 60s, okay?
Kathleen Martin.
I think that Betty's experience caused her to view them in a number of different ways. Initially, she was terrified. She had never been so terrified in her entire life. She said that she thought she was going to die. She was so fearful. When they found themselves on a back road, a dirt road, there were tall trees all around, and then there were these non-human entities standing in the road in front of her. She tried to escape. She wasn't able to. They intercepted her. They pointed something at her. She lost consciousness, but she regained consciousness as they were taking her down the path to the landed craft. Once she was on the craft, she was still fearful. But after the needle was inserted into her navel, causing great pain to her, one of the entities, the one that she called the leader and the one that we now think of is the individual who develops a relationship with the experiencer and sees that experiencer on an ongoing basis throughout their lives. When this individual removed Betty's pain, she was very grateful. And then the examiner went into the next room to examine Barney, and she struck up a conversation with him. In the end, she thought of him as being benevolent. It was her reaction to this highly unusual situation that she found herself in that caused her to initially be so fearful and think that they were negative. But in the end, she invited them to come back. She said that she knew of scientists, or she could find scientists, and she hoped that they would speak to them. The leader who was taking her back to the car at that point said, "I cannot say for certain whether or not we will be able to come back. We can find those that we want to find." And he apologized for frightening Betty and Barney initially. He said that it would be better if they didn't remember that portion of their experience, and he thought that it would cause a great deal of confusion for them, and it wouldn't be a good thing for them to remember, and that's why they removed the like a tablet that she had, that she hoped to take with her as proof of the experience that she had. She really did feel, in a sense, that she had developed a relationship with these individuals. She felt they were astronauts from another planet. That's how she perceived them. And she, in the end, stated that she was happy that that had happened in her life. So she did go out. She tried to communicate with them as part of an experiment being done by a group of scientists. She attempted to vector the craft in. That was through a psychophysics experiment that was being conducted. And so she, in a sense, lost her fear. She thought of her experience as being positive. Yet, in the end, I do believe that she was fearful that they might come into her home. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. Our next questioner from the audience, please.
Hi, my name's Nick. So we know humans have been able to record time for the past roughly 6,000 years, but thanks to religions and books such as the Bible, humans now only acknowledge the past 2,000 years. To that point, does anyone think there could have been some type of significant event 2,000 years ago, or reason why we do not acknowledge that other 4,000 years of intelligence?
Yes, please repeat the first part of the question.
Where that we've been able to record time for...
Recording time for 6,000 years, I got that, but what about the last 2,000 years?
Thanks to religious books and such, we only acknowledge the birth or resurrection of Christ at 2,000
so Christianity,
years.
you're
Yes.
talking about that.
Is there any thought as to why we repress the first 4,000 years of the human's ability to record time?
I don't. I don't know about anybody else. I think probably a lot of people up here are very avid students of ancient history. I mean, my entire life I've studied ancient Sumer and Egypt and Greece and Rome, and they're all pre-Christian. So I'm not really sure I understand where you're going with that.
Just I don't really just a thought as to why, really, that we only start from 2,000 years ago now, as opposed to
why
counting.
we record our years. That's
Yes.
I don't. There's probably other historians that might know this, but of course during the Roman Empire. But actually, I think it was after the fall of Rome, if I'm not mistaken, when Christianity sort of became the dominant, force in European civilization. When they redid the calendar, they of course started it from the time of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a case of history being written by the winners, I would imagine, and we're just still in the result of that. But I mean, for people who study ancient history, I mean, I certainly think it's true that we are all interested in the pre-Christian written history, and there's a lot of detailed histories that are written of that, of course.
Well, I guess I could reform the question as is there any links that anyone knows of as to extraterrestrial life and religions?
I'll quickly, and I'm sure other people have something to say. Thanks. My take on it is that there are lots of big holes in our ancient history, lots of them. Even in terms of archaeology, if you put everything into a room, it's really a lot of our evidence is, in some cases, minuscule, but we're able to make good inferences out of things. But there's a lot we don't know, and entire civilizations, in fact, in ancient times, have only some of them been discovered comparatively recently. So we're still learning a lot. In terms of the ancient astronaut or connection of ancient religions to other beings, this is always an interesting part of speculation, and we could probably go on endlessly about it. That's why they have the TV show Ancient Aliens and all of that. So there's a lot to look at. My personal favorite ancient anomaly to look at, actually, and I cannot get enough of it, is studying the Great Pyramid in Giza, which you look at mathematically in terms of engineering, in every other way, is just unbelievably complex, and I don't have a good explanation for it in conventional terms at all. It's off the charts, but there's other things as well. So I would just say that there's a great, huge numbers of mysteries that we're not explaining in our civilization. And what does it mean? Does it mean that we had great knowledge that's been lost? Some ancient human civilization understood something esoterically, or were we helped by others? And we don't know. I don't know.
Peter Robbins. I see we're coming into the last few minutes of the broadcast. Try to keep this concise. It's such a huge topic. We could devote weekend after weekend to it. All said and done, I'm convinced beyond any reasonable doubt that genuine, call them extraterrestrial or interdimensional appearances, incursions, events in ancient times were observed by human beings without a context to reference them to in pre-scientific mystical thinking. They probably mystified them and it became part of oral and written tradition. I think we see it come up regularly in the revered writings of all of the world's great religions. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, for anybody that's familiar with the Old Testament, I was brought up in the Reformed Jewish tradition to understand that the Bible is a collection of actual, factual things that really happened to real people, recycling of earlier myths from other cultures, allegories, analogies, morality tales, and the like. I don't think there's anything blasphemous about that attitude. Reading through these stories, I think one that jumps out for me, indeed, is Ezekiel. And I encourage all of you to read or reread it. And in fact, if you can get hold of several copies of the Old Testament, compare the translations. They're very close. Interesting little experiment. Out of the skies, lo, cometh a wheel within a wheel of the appearance of burnished beryllium. It's metal. It has eyes all about. Might be interpreted as windows. An angel encased in burnished beryllium comes out and interfaces with Ezekiel. It's in a metal suit. Its head has ceremonial animal heads on it. If you are preparing your technology to interface with an ancient civilization without freaking them the hell out any more than you're going to, you might want to think that through beforehand. I'm sure they studied the culture and appear in a manner, hopefully, that they might interpret. I'm thinking of very nice other intelligences who might well want to impart an ability to these ancients to evolve in a more civilized way, and on and on. The short answer to your question, though, is yes. I think ancient history, in pictographs, in cave drawings, in ancient writings, in religious traditions, on the walls of medieval monasteries, we have plenty of evidence for incursions, visitations, and appearances of other intelligences throughout human history and before.
Thank you, Peter. We only have a few minutes left. I'm afraid we will not have any more time for questions. Our apologies, but come back next year. We'll be here, I'm sure. Okay, we have 3 minutes left. We do have a few brief announcements. Ben, if you want to take that away. We already said we're not going to do a lot of announcements, but we do remind listeners, however, that they can find out more about our show, our many cases over the years, our public appearances, and there will be lots of links to all our guest panelists here and speakers. And you could also find over 720 free recorded shows from both ON 1240 and our 4.5-year run on CBS Radio, along with special shows and podcasts at our website, BehindTheParanormal.com. So what do we have coming up next week there, Ben?
Alrighty, so next Sunday, which would be September 10th, here on ON 1240, we'll welcome none other than Andrew Kitt, who is currently on the panel, and he is of the KRI Center of Consciousness Studies, and into a journey of electro voice phenomena and other stretches of consciousness, which is a fascinating subject to me because of my audio engineering background.
Okay. Anybody's got a job for Ben, let him know. Okay. There is one announcement, too. Coming up, we have a lot of events, Ben and I personally, and Peter Robbins will be joining us as well at the Greater New England UFO Conference, Friday, Saturday, October 6th and 7th, at the City Hall in Leominster, Massachusetts, not too far from here. Check it out, newenglandufo.com. It's $10 for Friday night, which is Bigfoot night, and it's $25 for the Saturday program, and it's going to be great. Nick Redford and Betty Andreasen, Peter, as we said, us, Bill Hall, Mark Antonio, Bigfoot night Friday. So thank you all, the audience especially. Thank you to our speakers. And before we end the show, we want to give everybody a nice round of applause. Okay. And we do remind everyone that the event continues today here at the Exeter Town Hall, the UFO Festival, and the authors will be in the book room, buy lots of books, and there'll be more speakers coming up. And again, thank you, everyone, and Ben is going to...
And thank you for joining us on our great cosmic journey, and we shall see you next time. We have 30 seconds.